In last month's 3-hour-long Fermi Paradox Compendium episode, I added a new solution called the Hermit Shoplifter hypothesis. A lot of folks asked in the comments on that episode that I expand on the idea as it was a brief entry, as among 100 others, even 3 hours doesn't give a lot of time for discussion. Folks also asked what I thought the top 5 or 10 Fermi Paradox solutions were, and this idea is one of them, so I thought it would be a good topic for our December 2024 Nebula exclusive. The solution came to me after a question on our monthly livestream Q&A about neurohacking directly stimulating various emotions or feelings in your brain, and if that could be a Fermi Paradox solution. The name itself is meant to be tongue-in-cheek in that we're mostly assuming the persons engaging in this behavior are grabbing up unused resources and running off into deep space, not actively stealing or shoplifting them, but our core concept here is that people might run for the proverbial hills with all they can carry and are not interested in being socially responsible or law-abiding unless it raises their odds of success. The concept isn't too hard to explain, but how it would roll out and why I deem it a more plausible Fermi Paradox solution is a bit more intricate, and we'll go through that today, but first the basics. Human civilization, and social organisms in general, operate on the idea that your odds of survival are much better as a group than going lone wolf, particularly if you have a long, vulnerable maturation period. For us, as essentially the dominant critters on this planet, much as any alien civilization probably would be on theirs, civilization is an absolute necessity, but also our only real threat on a day-to-day level. It is people, not wolves or lions, that we have to survive interacting with. It's a balancing act whether an individual will benefit more from active participation in that civilization, as it currently is, and very dependent on both them and that society, and their perception matters too, but by and large people feel at least some involvement is beneficial. And by and large, logic and reason confirm that. But there are plenty of folks who try to live more off the grid and probably will in the space era too. Indeed, we'll be looking at that early next year in our episode Space Homesteading. But advanced technology allows a lot of self-sufficiency options, up to and including biological immortality, mind backups, cloning, and not needing any other people to reproduce. It also likely allows someone with a sufficiently advanced 3D printer, large database of knowledge and entertainment, and a decently reliable AI to get their own spaceship, which is able to replace all of its own components and all your onboard equipment too. That would include a 3D printer, and so long as you have a power supply, raw materials, fuel, and time, you could replace everything, including the printer. And that would include printing genetic material too. We can already print DNA, so anything you got in your digital archives you could print, or print a machine able to. It would also be able to print doomsday weapons, and indeed any interstellar capable ship essentially is one. When you're moving at even 1% of light speed, every ton of spaceship you have is carrying the same kinetic energy as a large hydrogen bomb. And an aircraft carrier-sized ship able to move at 87% of light speed would ram into a planet with the equivalent of a couple billion such bombs. I tend to believe a civilization could come up with safeguards to protect against such scenarios, but I could be wrong, and more to the point, plenty of people at various times and places might believe this sort of inevitable destruction would happen. Hence, many of them would choose to live as far from civilization as possible. And since one of those threats might be a homicidal AI that would rampage out seeking to find and kill all people, they have decent justification to keep themselves as quiet and hidden as they can. This need not be a lone individual either, it could be a group. It is just that a lone individual would be able to do this, leave civilization on their own to found a new one, or just continue on their own indefinitely for eons. They no longer need to find some partners to help build a descendant civilization. And assuming our best guesses for technology come true, we probably will have folks able to follow this path within a couple of centuries, and electing to do just that. Indeed, it is one of the workarounds to concerns about a Skynet-style AI, in that outside the case where an AI rolls into an invincible technological singularity almost overnight, the gradual improvements to AI are exactly the kinds that make sophisticated automated production viable, and also make complex interactive virtual reality viable. It's a common Fermi Paradox solution to assume improvements to AI get us before we get out to the stars. But in practice, that's a byproduct of the tendency of early sci-fi to portray AI as either some superhuman android or some chained god in a box, and ignore applications that are mostly simple label-saving ones and require very little mind or volition. We tend to assume that since whoever corrected our spelling and grammar as a kid had to be smarter than us to do it, and AI able to do that is very intelligent too. Now we know better, and we know that's true for believable chat on most topics too. Your basic ship's computer requires virtually no brains to pilot a ship. Space is very empty and flat to navigate, and will only need as much brains as its internal diagnostics need, and then whatever amount it needs to keep you entertained. For a lot of folks, especially ones on the paranoid side and fleeing civilization, that's likely be on the lower side. They also have a lot of time to learn skills like programming and might be following their own transhuman journey of cybernetic augmentation of mind and body, so might be able to safely handle more sophisticated AI, or feel they are able to anyway. I have always assumed this was something a lot of people would do in the future, individually or in small groups. I tend to assume this will often be the true vanguard wave of humanity into the galaxy too. That the main human colonization wave would follow along slower since it would only be expanding as fast as people wanted more elbow room and new civilizations in which they might prosper and climb a fairly normal social hierarchy. So they would expand out slower and often bump into some system 10,000 light years away that someone beat them to by a couple thousand years and either founded their own civilization there or left fingerprints from them refueling or upgrading there and moving on. Or even leaving booby traps in their wake like self-replicating minefields and mortar bots to slow or discourage others behind them. If a person believes the biggest threat to their continued existence is other people, or AI equivalents, that they could live for a billion years on a few gigatons of stored fusion fuel, then they have every reason to flee Earth and only stop when far away to raid an uninhabited solar system for all the resources they feel they can safely obtain before fleeing to the intergalactic void. Run from Earth on whatever ship you can get that can get you a few hundred light years away, stop and scavenge all you can, and run to the galaxy's edge. There are likely to be practical limits on both how long you can last as an individual and how long your resources, no matter how well stored, can last. Heck, you might even have proton decay as a possible threat, causing your hydrogen to disappear on you. Too many resources also makes you very detectable and tempting as a target for others. Depending on your technology, there's likely to be a calculable maximum or point of diminishing returns where your odds of waiting too long to escape or attract thieves exceeds your gains from stopping to gather more. I'm not sure if that would be at the stage of having a mile-long ship packed with fuel and raw materials or stealing off with your own sun, but so long as it's below the Kardashev 1 scale of things, it would not be currently detectable by us unless trillions and trillions did it. Which they well might. But that implies you already have an astronomically detectable interstellar civilization going on that's growing outward more sluggishly behind these lone wolves and which qualifies as very loud aliens. And again, this is my de facto assumption about our own future and various grabby alien equivalents. Their vanguard is noticeable as it approaches you, but it is their expanding developed core systems that are blatantly visible to other civilizations. The Fermi paradox solution part comes from this scenario where they turn out to be right about their paranoia and civilization does implode, and that it does it every time a seed gets planted and reaches critical mass, and usually long before being visible to us. If we imagine a high-tech civilization capable of practical interstellar colonization has a ceiling on risk avoidance of the average citizen in any given year having a 1 in a trillion chance of deciding they want to blow everyone up and successfully getting their hands on the ability to do so undetected, then they're only getting on the Kardashev scale for the brief moment they go boom, because on average a population of our current scale is more likely than not to have that 1 in a trillion scenario pop up once in a century. And again, that's 1 in a trillion. Your odds of being struck by lightning while buying a winning lotto ticket, so we're not exactly being paranoid here. Assuming anyone escapes this forced self-destruction event, some probably go the lone wolf or small group route, while others go seed a new colony. They probably grow slowly after being planted and start getting nervous as they grow, sending out more seeds, but none of these ever grow very big and everyone gets reports of their homeworld going boom. Then the next one, then again and again. They probably develop very accurate actuarial tables about the odds on these things and get good at lowering the odds too. Eventually nobody does big settlements, and those who want to live 1 billion years don't settle with any group of more than a few hundred, and many none at all, long before you've gotten anywhere near colonizing a whole galaxy to K3 or building up any system to K2, so as to be astronomically visible by us. Everyone is down to tiny colonies, mobile villages, or lone wolves. In terms of that window, it all comes down to the odds your neighbors will kill you in a given year versus your current expected lifespan. Right now, your odds as an average human being of being murdered in a year is somewhere on an order of 1 in 100,000 to 1 in 10,000, depending on where you live and your own personal lifestyle and circumstances. The worldwide average is about 6 in 100,000, and that's what it is for the US too. Murder is not a very common way to die young though. It's way higher for overdoses and vehicle crashes, and even falling deaths are twice as common as homicides in the US. The usual assumption is that technology would decrease these, but your preventable death rate is about 1 in 1,000 per year. If tomorrow we developed a drug that made you stop aging and be immune to cancers and other diseases, you would be more likely than not to die from accident, injury, or homicide before you got to be 1,000. The fundamental notion here is that the ceiling on a civilization's individual lifespan starts getting far higher than their half-life of being killed by accident or malice, then many of them will pursue ways to lower that odds, even as we do now. And for post-biological life, that ceiling can go on beyond trillions of years, and even more in terms of subjective time, which exacerbates the issue. What odds of a sour relationship turning homicidal just once in 1 billion years, when being killed by friends and family is already fairly common? Now add into that value that is based off your subjective time, so if a post-biological mind is accelerated to experience time at a rate of 1 year per every real-time day, then their odds of death from that raises by a factor of 365, and your lifespan ceiling might be 1 trillion years of real time, but you might be less likely than not to survive a single human lifetime. So if your major source of early death is other people, you can go on living in a virtual paradise or with a wire crammed into your pleasure centers, essentially neurohacking, and if necessary, run off into the intergalactic void at a high fraction of light speed, knowing that in 1 trillion years you'll be over the cosmological event horizon and can enjoy your energy stash safe from anyone other than a Boltzmann brain ever coming after you, which is itself incredibly unlikely even in a place as big as our current observable universe, even on trillion-year timelines. Though you might factor the odds of that scenario into your calculus for how much resources it is worth gathering. How long does your fuel last? Well, in raw numbers, if your ship life support and computer uses 1000 watts, and we assume you only get 1% efficiency on your fusion reactor, then you're getting around 30,000 years per kilogram of fuel, which means a single megaton of fusion fuel is going to last you 30 trillion years. Jupiter alone contains 1 billion times that much hydrogen. You might be a couple orders of magnitude higher or lower than that too, and you might need to use 99% of your energy to escape the galaxy at speed. If we assume that extreme case, 99% of your fuel to leave, and that each kilogram only lasted you 300 years once out there, not 30,000, and that we set aside that fuel for each of 10 billion humans, then to last 30 trillion years each would require not even 1% of 1% of Jupiter's mass. We can imagine being a lot more wasteful with resources, leaking a lot too, and being far more numerous, but Jupiter isn't even 1% of the solar system's mass, and this solar system is just 1 trillionth of this galaxy's mass. And on the flip side, some post-biological entity might be using a micro-black hole or straight matter-to-energy converter for a power source nearly 100 times more energy efficient than fusion, and not even need 1 watt to survive on running ultra-cold computation out in deep space or even beyond the galaxy, still experience times orders of magnitude faster than we do, and have journeyed out at a slower pace. So their megaton of fuel might last them not 30 trillion years, but 300 quadrillion years, too long after the last star has died off. And they might have dragged some entire icy dwarf planet with them like Pluto, billions of times more fuel than we just allotted them. There are doubtless many trillions of dwarf planets in this galaxy, thousands for every human alive, or gas giants for that matter. Indeed, the only reason this doesn't allow them to take entire stars with them, since there's almost 100 per person alive, is that would be astronomically visible. That's essentially the rim migration hypothesis that people looked at with ring galaxies and thought might be a Fermi paradox solution. The basic notion is that you could have a scenario where everyone is trying to get the heck out of Dodge as quickly and quietly as they can with all the resources they can, and I don't think someone who already was quick to get away from their homeworld is going to be sitting around trying to package up an entire gas giant when they're worried some swarm of von Neumann berserkers might arrive any year now and heralded by a swarm of guided relativistic kill missiles. Dragging a whole planet with you seems fairly likely to be detectable, and a whole sun is anything but covert, but there is a real limit as to how fast you can dump matter into a micro black hole, which is also not a subtle process, as that's basically a micro quasar and not so micro if you're trying to cram a planet in there in a few years. You also are probably not thinking, hey, I've got 1 trillion years of fuel, I'm willing to risk sticking around here for another decade to bring that up to 1 quadrillion, especially as the real universe engineering of such things confronts you with leaks and other issues that probably puts a half-life on your own resource pile that's evaporating away. Double as much doesn't let you double the time, and 100 times as much might buy you just 10 times as much extension. So you grab what you can quickly and quietly, hence the Shoplifter term, even though this is presumably unowned resources. But the workaround that came to my mind when I was picturing this was that while you can't stop at every system to grab some more stuff, as every acceleration and deceleration is blowing huge amounts of resources by the tyranny of the rocket equation and making you very visible whenever you flick your engines on, you can be dropping your own von Neumann probes behind you to decelerate and land on some rock and convert it into a big catapult for hurling supplies at your predetermined location for high-speed rendezvous. That's tricky and leaves a trail, but it is an option, and since the AI in those need not be that smart, and thus dangerous to you or others, you don't have much reason to tell it to be very restrained in its harvesting or shut off. So the galaxy might be full of these dumb harvesters left in the wake of people fleeing, and might also be set to attack anything that shows up, since that would discourage pursuit, make it harder, and those who left them don't care about leaving people behind who dislike them, just so long as they don't mess things up so bad that some might pursue them for blind vengeance, which personally wrecking hundreds of star systems might cause. And even in this case, all this might fall well below the K2 and K3 detection thresholds we have right now. It is also an example of plausible convergent behavior, as it is assuming civilizations and the species that make them may arise feeling a need for company for the sake of better survival, but may drift away from that when it ceases to be the case. They don't need you and don't feel like putting up with you when they have 10 trillion novels to read and films to watch and a vast VR realm to dwell in. Fundamentally, I don't see this as a super strong Fermi paradox solution, but it's a fairly robust one as they go, as I can't point to any flaw, it just has some narrow windows or assumptions. We don't know if those are true or not yet and have no way to check, and they're not ridiculously improbable ones. Most solutions include those, so by default this one ranks higher by not having huge fatal flaws, rather than being amazingly compelling. Some caveats and notes though. First, it's assuming the individual is willing to divorce from others for ultra-long-term survival, and the problem there is that if you're post-biological, you already have some impressive paths to avoid being murdered. You can back your mind up redundantly, and in a post-scarcity environment, a lot of reasons for homicide are gone, so even the idea that you have a 1 in a billion chance of being successfully murdered per year might be high. Realistically, it's suicide that's the big threat over that time, and you can hide from others but not from yourself. It's easy to imagine that over even just 1 million years, and with mind backups to boot, you might have a close friendship or experience that made you suicidal and delete all your backups. Over 1 trillion years, it's hard to imagine that you wouldn't have that. Even virtual characters in your virtual paradise might say or do things that drove you to want to end things. It's also worth noting that while you could probably have the technology to program yourself not to be suicidal or bored, your civilization could also presumably do that same thing to potential lunatics, madmen, and angry AI. Add into that, we're assuming a pretty selfish perspective that is also pretty nihilistic. I can easily imagine a lot of people of that variety fleeing for the hills and wanting to live forever, but I think that's a harder lift for civilization in its entirety, and then we have to assume that nobody just replants their civilization either from the folks who fled or just survivors of whichever apocalypse hit their homeworld. And of course it doesn't work at all without that apocalypse being likely. We all take for granted that civilizations collapse eventually anyway, and talk about Rome as some eternal empire because it lasted over 1,000 years. I do not think an actuary publishing tables saying, "Don't colonize any planet with more than 1 billion people, or your odds of doom wiping you all out in a given millennia will reach 2.3%, is going to stop people doing that much. Nor are the only reactions ignore it or run for the intergalactic void. There's many ways to combat those odds, and many would try even if there were not, and a lot of paths besides non-stop solo flight to the great beyond. Also, as noted, they could be leaving machines behind to mine for them, so they could also be dropping behind beacons that they could leave their encrypted future course on and tell to go run a few hundred light years off in a random direction so they could keep up on events in the galaxy by one-time pad encryption and tight beam communication. That same option would let people brag about their new scientific theory or how many achievements they got in that game everyone loved right before leaving. And this same hidden relay method permits folks to consider remaining in touch with others without fear of being at great risk of attack by them. All that said, it is a pretty plausible path. I'm very happily married and with 3 wonderful kids in a home I'm very attached to in a community I love, but if all of that ended, I could easily imagine a post-scarcity era jumping on board my own personal spaceship and heading into the void. In my case, I'd probably stop regularly to plant colonies from digital archives or build some megastructure, but that's a personal obsession and probably not universal, though probably more common within this audience. Dennis E. Taylor's Barbivorce series is a good one to read if life as a post-biological ship traveling the galaxy sounds interesting. We don't know what the practical limits on storage of raw materials would be, but for data, including digitized data, it's effectively infinite with sufficient redundancy, and just the algorithms we already use for ensuring data transfers correctly and doesn't decay in redundant storage. So I'm quite confident many people would choose variations of this path in the future if the technology permits, which seems quite likely, and may be amongst the first people to reach distant parts of the galaxy and amongst the last people, or post-humans, to survive to the end of time, but I think it's a harder lift to assume everyone else does get wiped out before colonizing space themselves, or that out of all of the hermits traveling the heavens, some don't occasionally stop to replant civilization. And on that note, thanks again for joining us for another Nebula exclusive. As just mentioned, this episode first came out on Nebula a little over a year ago. And every month we release a new episode exclusively on Nebula, like this month's episode, Post-Stellar Civilizations, or next month's episode, coming out right after midnight on January 1st, 2025, which is also on the Fermi paradox, exploring how air and atmospheres might factor into which worlds can develop life, and eventually civilizations. But this month we're not interested in the origin of civilizations, but rather their fate in a future so distant that all the stars have burned out. We'll leap in that distant future of post-stellar civilizations in our monthly exclusive episode on Nebula, the largest creator-owned streaming service, which has tons of extra content from myself and many other creators, including a new full-length episode of SFIA, like Post-Stellar Civilizations, that we release on the first day of every month. And every episode of the show also airs on Nebula a few days early and ad-free. No random commercials or built-in ads like this one. Using my code, IsaacArthur, you can get 40% off and join for about $3 a month, about the price of the drink or snack you've been enjoying during the episode. We also now have lifetime memberships, gift memberships, and gift cards available to let you share Nebula with friends and family. When you sign up at my link, go.nebula.tv/IsaacArthur, and use my code, IsaacArthur, you not only get access to all the great stuff Nebula offers, like Post-Stellar Civilizations, you will also be directly supporting this show. And speaking of the show, well, it's done for today. We're not quite done for the year yet, and I hope you'll join us this Sunday, December 29th, as we wrap up our 2024 schedule with some predictions for the new year and for further ahead in time too, along with a discussion of how reliable predictions are and why. If you'd like to get alerts when those episodes come out, hit the like, subscribe, and notification buttons. You can also help support the show on Patreon or by becoming a member of the channel on YouTube. and you can also find other ways to help us at isaacarthur.net. Until next time, thanks for watching, and have a great week.